Traders, how are you? With Marcello. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. This week we have Elon Musk getting attacked again. We have Neuralink coming out with their first test subject, let's call it. We also have record closes for stocks and even the U.S. cattle herd reaching record lows. Let's go ahead and get started. Overall this week, we had some economic numbers come out, mostly the job numbers that seem to be very good. There's some expectation that maybe the Fed or the central bank of the United States isn't going to raise rates, or possibly it's going to keep them the same for longer, right? If they do that, then obviously it's not good for stocks. But if they decide to drop them, then everything will start kicking into gear, because since we have such an over-financialized economy, what will happen is people will start buying more loans, start buying more houses, because people can afford things again. For that reason, the stocks this week exploded to the upside. The Dow and the S&P 500 hit their sixth record close. The NASDAQ was positive also. The only market negative in North America was Canada. And then in overseas market news, the European markets were mostly mixed. Istanbul was the biggest winner there, if you consider Turkey to be part of Europe. Latin America mostly mixed as well. The libertarian experiment in Argentina was the biggest positive stock market there with Milei. Argentina went up almost 5%. Africa and the Middle East was mixed. Egypt went up 2.77%. Far East, Australia, and the Asian region, mostly mixed. We had the Shanghai markets being the biggest negative and the Kospi of South Korea being the biggest positive. And no huge news on the conspiracy theory front this week, or weather news. Looks like all the freak weather went out. There has been a lot of fires, though, here in Colombia. For example, Chile, Valparaiso near the coast is doing a lot. But the climate change that they have blamed is not completely true, because it seems like, just like in the United States and Canada, some people started some fires. Bitcoin and other crypto news. FTX, if you guys remember, at one point was the second largest crypto exchange in the entire world. They went bankrupt. They now have reported that they expect to repay all of its crypto customers in full. Bitcoin for the week, I would say it's mostly stagnant, even though it was positive by 2.6%. It's at $43,070. And then in the commodity news, not a lot of news with, I accidentally deleted the oil information, so you have to forgive me for that. But the U.S. cattle herd shrinks to a 73-year low, and a blow for beef lovers, so get ready for your cricket snacks. Cocoa prices hit a 46-year high due to drought concerns in West Africa. If you guys didn't know, chocolate is made from it looks like a fruit. It looks kind of like a papaya, kind of, not really, but it's a fruit. And so the fruit is called a cacao, right? And then that I believe, don't quote me on this, but about 60-70% of all of the cacao that's grown in the world comes from 3 countries in Western Africa. So if you guys look at Africa, just look up the Ivory Coast. It's literally right in there. 4 states are considering lifting taxes on precious metals. None of them are actually communist left-leaning states. Georgia, Kentucky, Wisconsin, and Kansas, they're either thinking of removing either the income tax or the sales tax on these things. And one of the things I find really weird, once you start kind of, digging into these conspiracy theory holes and things like that and the real history about the U.S., most people don't realize that the central bank that we have now, if I get this chair properly settled, the bank that we have now, the central bank, is actually the 3rd central bank that we have had. And we might be going on the 4th now with this new government coin, right? The first 2 failed. And the reason why I explain this is because we live in this world where people just want more power. And, the people that control the world, not presidents and corporations, but, the famous families and, the people that pull the strings, really, they just seems like they always want control. And when we didn't have a central bank, when the first one failed and then the second one was started, or when the second one failed and then the third one started, there was a lot of progress. There was a lot of wealth going around. So I just go to tell you that because we live, it's that old story where if you put a frog into a boiling bowl of water, it'll just jump out. But if you heat it slowly, it'll cook to death. And that's kind of what's happened over the years, where, why do we need people telling us to control our monetary system? Why do we have to have these bureaucrats that are telling you and I, for example, to stop eating meat because it's bad for the environment, while one flight, for example, on Bill Gates' jet is more carbon in the atmosphere than what you and I drive our cars in our lifetime. So I just want to mention that to you because the world was very different back in the day, and it wasn't necessarily worse. Gold is up 1.03% to 2,040 and 70. One of the interesting things about gold is if you look at the number of gold lingots, I think it's called, the square blocks, I believe it's lingots. The same amount of lingots today that it would take to buy a standard single-family house is the same as it was 100 years ago. Because gold preserves wealth while a lot of the paper money, for example, doesn't. If you didn't know, the United States dollar has lost over 97% of its value, but according to gold, right, gold has gone from 0 to 2,000, and a lot of people are saying it's going to go a lot higher now. So I just think that's really interesting, and that's part of the thing that I'm telling you guys about the central banks. Like, why do we need? That's why we see these booms and then the busts and then these booms and then financial calamities and booms again, right? Don't really need that. Silver went down by 0.57% to 22.75. In financial and banking news, BRICS, which is the economic bloc that was started between Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, even though South Africa doesn't really have that good of an economy anymore, they now have 35% of the global GDP, which is larger than the G7. Russia also now settles 85% of all of its trade in local currencies. And BRICS members are immune now to U.S. sanctions. If you guys remember, the reason why this is actually happening and a lot more countries are joining the BRICS is because they don't want to have the situation that happened to Russia. They don't want to get too political about the situation with the war. Obviously, it's not a good thing for any country to invade another country like Russia did with Ukraine. But in my view, and most views of people that won't be in the mainstream media, who even watches the news anymore, right? All these people lie about everything. But the U.S. essentially provoked that attack, right? The U.S. provoked Russia to attack Ukraine, in my opinion. And they wanted to shut down Russia to keep control, especially militarily and economically, because Russia is one of the big militaries in the world, by throwing all of these sanctions at them, right? Companies left. We wouldn't allow them to do anything. Russian yachts were being seized in Europe. And now they've created a system where they don't need U.S. dollar anymore. And if you guys didn't know, if a country is going to send money anywhere in the world, for example, if the U.S. is going to send money to Germany or Germany to South Africa or South Africa to Russia or Russia to Brazil, anybody sending money anywhere has to go through the American system called SWIFT. So they want to create a parallel financial system where they don't have to go through this nonsense with the U.S. because the U.S. is in the late stage empire where they want to push everybody around, but it's not necessarily the best for everybody. We also have a problem with banks now. Japan's Azora Bank is slashing the value of some of the U.S. towers by more than 50%. If you guys remember, during the pandemic, a lot of people started working from home. A lot of them didn't return to the office either, doing, hybrid working environments. And so a lot of these commercial real estate towers are not worth anything anymore, essentially, because people aren't going to work and a lot of these companies don't need offices anymore. So that's the first problem. There's another problem in New York where the regional bank called New York Community Bank Corp, their stock went down by almost 40% on Wednesday, then another 11% on Thursday. And this has to do with the fact that they reported an almost $200 million loss in the fourth quarter. They did set aside $552 million for provisions for credit losses. But now we might have another regional banking crisis on our hands. And remember that this bank that just went down, the New York Community Bank Corp, was the one that took over the failed Signature Bank during the crisis in 2023. So everything's coming full circle. Jeff Bezos, founder and billionaire of Amazon, is going to sell 50 million shares of Amazon worth $8.6 billion. And the European Central Bank tamed inflation. It's at 2.9%. And a lot of people now are expecting them to start lowering rates, very similar to the Central Bank of the United States. Political news, El Salvador's President Bukele, which self-identifies as the world's coolest dictator. In less than 5 years, he transformed El Salvador to a peace haven, let's say, because before it was one of the drug and gang capitals of the world. Now it has one of the lowest homicide rates in all of the Americas. Is going to go for re-election. Very likely that he'll win because obviously he put a little bit of order in the streets, unlike what we have in the United States right now. And economic news, the IMF forecast for global growth is 3.1 in 2024. I don't generally talk a lot about those forecasts because they're always wrong. Just like these talking heads on CNBC, everything's great with the economy, and then we had the crash in 2008. And the U.S. Labor Department figures on Friday, there was 353,000 new non-farm jobs added in January. The unemployment rate was steady at 3.7%, and the participation rate for the population of the U.S. was at 62.5%. Corporate news, Sophie, the huge financial conglomerate, surged over 20% after they reported their first profit. They had over $594 million in revenue in the quarter four. GM rose over 7% after they beat earnings on revenue. They made almost $43 billion in revenue. They were expecting just over 38. Alphabet, Google, which is the owner of Google, they fell over 7% after they had a disappointing fourth quarter. Their ad revenue fell below what the expectations were. And Amazon went up over 7% after they beat their earnings. I think it's kind of mundane to just repeat, this company made this billion, this company made that billion. So let me know if you guys actually want the numbers, but I think it's a little bit better if it's summarized, right? If this one beat earnings, it did well, et cetera, et cetera. Amazon stated on Monday morning that it's going to not move forward with the deal to buy the maker of the Roomba, which is iRobot, due to regulatory hurdles. So now the company iRobot, which makes the electric automatic vacuum cleaner, has decided to lay off 31% of their employees. UPS also is cutting 12,000 jobs as they're trying to cut $1 billion in costs. And UPS is generally seen as a bellwether for the economy because obviously if companies are doing really well, then the shipping is great because they're shipping stuff everywhere and they need stuff done, right? So UPS is saying that the conditions most likely are not going to improve until the second half of 2024. And Tesla slid over 2% after a Delaware judge voided, Tesla's CEO's $56 billion pay package, which I think is unfair because he was essentially working for just $1 before. And they had all of these goals and checkpoints for him to reach. And he essentially worked for free, didn't take a compensation. And this was going to be his compensation, even though a lot of people didn't think he would actually be able to do it. So now the stock is down over 21% over the last month. Tesla founder Elon Musk on X said that he wants to reincorporate the company in Texas to not have to deal with these shenanigans. And the judge that actually ruled this on Delaware has connections to the current Biden administration, which basically means that the attacks on Elon Musk continue. Tesla Model Y was the world's best-selling vehicle in 2023. It beat the RAV4 and the Corolla. It's impressive, from zero to best-selling car in the world. And Meta Platforms, which owns Facebook and Instagram, climbed over 20% after they had a 3x rise in quarter four profit. Their revenue jumped 25%, and they just started declaring a new dividend now they're going to pay to investors. Trade news, the U.S. on Monday is reinstating the sanctions against Venezuela. Remember that there were some agreements there that as long as they had fair and free elections, that they would remove the sanctions, where the Supreme Court in Venezuela said that the opposition party could run in the election, so that would mean a little bit of tampering. And in technology, Elon Musk stated that the first human patient received an implant in their brain via Neuralink, which is his brain chip company. He's recovering well, and the U.S. FDA gave clearance last year for the first trial test in a human being. The idea is to be able to help people, especially that have paralysis and other neurological conditions, be able to use the chip to be able to use their arms and hands and speak, maybe, those kind of things. Firm is valued at $5 billion last year, but there are 4 Fed legislators that are investigating that company as well, because since Elon Musk gave a little bit of free speech to X and everybody around the world, got to go after Elon Musk. GM and Honda have begun developing a hydrogen car, which is based on a hydrogen fuel system. BMW even is going to stop development, or I would say the research and development of electric cars and start putting it into hydrogen cars. A lot of people think that they can actually replace diesel engines. And Starlink now has 5,000 satellites orbiting Earth. If you guys are in a rural area, most places are available now that are rural. I highly recommend it. It's amazing. And Google update reveals AI will start reading your private messages. So upgrade your phone this year before the new AI comes out and starts reading everything. It's going to tell Uncle Sam what you've been doing. And at international events, Vietnam and Philippines agreed to boost cooperations between their coast guards and prevent unwanted incidents in the South China Sea. Remember, in that area of the world, there's a specific law. I believe it's 100 kilometers or 100 miles off the coast is property of the country. After that, it's international waters. And there's some that crisscross there in the South China Sea where China says it's their property and it's literally, 1,000 miles away from their coast. So they want to try to combat China because things will probably speed up there as well. And then in Europe, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, a lot of farms protests around the world. You're not seeing this on the mainstream news, which is probably why you're watching this channel. But they were throwing excrements of animals on cops and all those kind of things to be able to stop these insane regulations about the quote-unquote environment, like the ones that they're trying to pass in the U.S., like, you got to get rid of pizza ovens and gas stoves. So that's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe. And remember, the preppers were right.